"If you want to come for Christmas, come wash the dishes," my daughter-in-law yelled at me over the phone. I replied, "Enjoy it." When she saw the photos of my luxurious estate in Napa Valley, my phone rang 71 times. "It's so good you're here," she would say to me. "Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled." The phone rang at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I was watching my favorite cooking show, the one where they make those elaborate desserts I could never even attempt. The shrill sound cut through the quiet afternoon like a knife through butter. "Hello, Grace." Jessica's voice was cold, all business. No warmth, no pleasantries. Just my name, said as if it left a bad taste in her mouth. "Oh, hello, dear," I said, muting the television and straightening up in my worn-out armchair. "How are you? How's Michael?" She didn't answer my question. She never did. Instead, she launched directly into what I now realize was a carefully planned humiliation. "I'm calling about Christmas," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "If you want to be a part of it this year, you can come early to help with the dishes. The food and service will be handled by people who actually know what they're doing." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, that familiar ache spreading through my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. People who actually know what they're doing. As if 37 years of cooking for my late husband and son meant nothing. As if the countless meals I had prepared with love and care were just amateur attempts. "I understand," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. "Good. Be here at 2 o'clock sharp. We'll be eating at 4. That way you'll have plenty to clean up afterward." There was a pause, and I could hear her satisfaction through the phone. "Oh, and Grace, don't bring any of your contributions. We have everything covered." The line went dead. She had hung up without a goodbye, leaving me sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone, as if it could somehow retract the words I had just heard. I put the phone down with trembling hands and stared at the blank television screen. My reflection looked back at me. A 64-year-old woman with graying hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a sweater that had seen better days. When had I become so invisible, so disposable? The memories came rushing back, a familiar flood, as they always did when Jessica reminded me of my place in her perfect little world. It hadn't always been this way. When Michael was young, just the two of us after his father died, we had been a team. He would help me set the table while I cooked our simple meals, and we would talk about his day at school, his dreams, his fears. But then, Jessica arrived. I remember the first time he brought her home. She was 25, 5 years younger than Michael, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She walked through my small apartment as if she were inspecting a crime scene, her nose slightly wrinkled as she took in my second-hand furniture and faded wallpaper. "It's so quaint," she had said, the word dripping with condescension. "Very authentic vintage." Michael had laughed, thinking it was a compliment. I knew better. The changes started small. Michael began declining my invitations for dinner because Jessica preferred restaurants. He stopped calling as often because Jessica thought he was too dependent on his mother. When they got engaged, they didn't ask for my help planning the wedding. "Jessica's mother is handling everything," he explained. "It's just less complicated that way." I should have spoken up then. I should have fought for my place in my son's life. But I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law, the one who caused trouble in their marriage. So I stepped back, made myself smaller. I hoped my quiet compliance would earn me some affection, some respect. It never did. After they were married, I became the obligation, the woman they had to invite to holidays out of duty, not desire. I would arrive with homemade dishes that were barely touched, while everyone praised Jessica's catered trays. I would offer to help, only to be told that everything was under control. I would try to connect with Michael, but Jessica was always there, steering conversations away from our shared memories and toward topics that excluded me. The worst part wasn't the exclusion itself. It was watching my son let it happen. Michael, the boy who used to curl up next to me when thunderstorms scared him, who insisted on one more story every night, had become a man who sat silently while his wife treated me like the hired help. I walked to my small kitchen and put the kettle on for tea, a ritual that had comforted me through countless difficult moments over the years. As I waited for the water to boil, I noticed my reflection in the window above the sink. When had I started to look so defeated? When had my shoulders started to curve inward, as if I were trying to make myself disappear? The apartment around me told the story of my diminished life. One bedroom, one bathroom, a living area that served as a dining room and entertainment center. The furniture was clean but worn, collected over decades from thrift stores and garage sales. The walls were bare, except for a few photographs of Michael growing up photos Jessica had never shown any interest in seeing. I had been living here for 8 years, ever since I could no longer afford the small house where Michael grew up. The rent was manageable on my modest pension, and I had convinced myself it was cozy, not cramped. But now, thinking of Jessica's pristine home, with its granite countertops and professional-grade appliances, I felt the weight of my reduced circumstances more heavily than ever. The kettle whistled, startling me from my thoughts. As I poured the hot water over my generic brand tea bag because the good ones were too expensive, I made a decision that surprised even me. I picked up the phone and dialed Michael's number. "Mom?" He sounded surprised. I rarely called him directly, having learned that Jessica preferred to control the flow of communication between us. "Hello, honey," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I just wanted to let you know that I won't be coming for Christmas this year." There was a long pause. "What? Why not? I think it would be better if you just had it with Jessica's family. No need to complicate things." "Mom, don't be ridiculous. Of course you're coming. Jessica just called you, didn't she?" The way he said it told me everything. He knew exactly what his wife had said to me. He had probably been sitting right there when she made the call, listening as she reduced his mother to a dishwasher. "Yes, she did. And I've decided I have other plans." "What other plans?" His voice held a note of irritation, as if my having a life outside of serving his family was somehow an inconvenience. I looked around my empty apartment, at the silence that had become my constant companion, at the life I had allowed to become so small that my absence wouldn't even leave a noticeable gap. "I'm going to do something just for me," I said quietly. "Enjoy your Christmas, Michael." I hung up before he could reply, before I could lose my nerve and take it all back. For the first time in years, I had told them no. It felt terrifying and liberating all at once. As I sipped my tea in the encroaching twilight, I had no idea that this moment of quiet rebellion would change everything. I had no idea that the phone call I would receive tomorrow would offer me a way out of this prison I had built around myself, brick by brick, compromise by compromise. But deep in my chest, beneath the hurt and the humiliation, something small and fierce was beginning to stir. Something that had been dormant for far too long was finally beginning to wake up. The letter arrived the next morning, Wednesday, in an expensive cream-colored envelope with my name written in elegant script. I almost threw it away, assuming it was another charity solicitation. But something about the weight of the paper made me pause. The return address read, Herrera and Associates, Attorneys at Law, from a firm in Street Helena, California. My hands trembled as I opened it. No one sends good news through lawyers, I thought, already imagining some final debt from my late husband coming back to haunt me. "Dear Mrs. Grace Ann Parker," it began, using my full maiden name in a way that made me sit up straighter. No one had called me Grace Ann in decades. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Mrs. Cordelia Rosemont, who died peacefully at her estate on October 15th. Per her last will and testament, you have been named as a beneficiary. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange for the transfer of assets." I read the letter 3 times before the words began to make sense. Cordelia Rosemont. The name transported me back 45 years, to a time when I was a completely different person, Grace Ann Parker. That had been my name then, before I became Grace Evans, before I chose love over luxury and never looked back. I was 19, fresh out of finishing school, and an heiress to the Parker textile fortune. My family owned mills all over the South, and our name opened doors others could only dream of. I had been a rebel, even then. While my friends were making arranged marriages with men from families like ours, I had fallen head over heels for Thomas Evans, a mechanic who worked at the garage where I'd taken my car for repairs. He was honest and kind, and he made me laugh in ways my proper suitors never had. He saw me as Grace Ann, not a Parker fortune on legs. When I told my parents I intended to marry him, they were horrified, My father threatened to disown me. My mother took to her bed with nervous exhaustion. The family lawyer explained to me, in terms I was too young and too in love to fully appreciate, exactly what I would be giving up. The Parker family trust was structured in a way that required family approval for inheritance. If I married outside our social circle, I would forfeit my claim to the family wealth, not just my inheritance, but my entire connection to the family legacy. I was 19, and I believed love conquered all. I chose Thomas. The day after our small wedding ceremony, attended only by Thomas's family and a few friends, I received a formal letter from the very same law firm that had contacted me 45 years later. I was no longer a Parker. My trust fund was dissolved. My inheritance was revoked. I was free to live my new life, but I would do it without the safety net I had known since birth. I never regretted it. Thomas and I had 30 wonderful years together before cancer took him. We struggled financially. Thomas's mechanic's salary and later his small pension wasn't much, but we were happy. We raised Michael in a home filled with love, even if it lacked the material luxuries I had grown up with. After Thomas died, I had to sell our little house and move into this apartment. Michael was already married to Jessica by then, building a life of his own. I never told him about the family I had left behind, about the wealth I had walked away from. I thought it would only make him feel guilty about our modest circumstances, or worse, resentful that I had chosen poverty over privilege. Now, sitting in my little kitchen with this letter in my trembling hands, I wondered if that had been a mistake. I called the law firm immediately. The receptionist put me through to Mr. Herrera himself, who spoke with the kind of refined accent I remembered from my childhood. "Mrs. Evans," he said warmly, "or should I say, Miss Parker. Cordelia spoke of you often." "She did?" My voice came out as a bare whisper. "Oh yes. She followed your life with great interest. When she found out you had married for love and left the family, she said you were the bravest woman she had ever known. She never married, you know. Said she could never find a man worth giving up her independence for. Cordelia had been my closest friend during our years at finishing school. We had lost touch after my marriage, but apparently she had never forgotten me. The legacy is quite substantial," Mr. Herrera continued. "An estate in Napa Valley, along with its contents and a trust to maintain it. Cordelia felt that someone who had once given up everything for love deserved to spend her golden years in comfort." I couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt around me. "Mrs. Evans, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed to say. "It's just. I can't believe this is real. It's very real." Cordelia was very specific in her instructions. "The estate has been kept in pristine condition, waiting for you. When would you like to arrange a viewing?" When I hung up the phone 20 minutes later, I had detailed information about a property I now owned in a state I had only visited once. The estate was located near Street, Helena, with views of vineyards and colonial gardens. It had been Cordelia's private retreat, furnished with antiques and art she had collected over her lifetime. The trust would provide more income than I had seen in decades. I sat in my kitchen, looking at the photos Mr. Herrera had emailed to my old computer. The estate was breathtaking. Stone walls covered in bougainvillea, tall windows looking out onto terraced gardens, rooms filled with elegant furniture that likely cost more than everything I owned combined. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt something other than resignation about my future. I felt possibility, but with possibility came fear. What did I know about living in Napa, about managing properties and trust funds, about being the kind of person who owned an estate instead of renting a one-bedroom apartment? My phone rang, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. Michael's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, what was that about yesterday? Jessica is upset that you hung up on her." "I didn't hang up on anyone," I said calmly. "I simply told you I had other plans." "What plans?" "You never have plans." The words stung because they were true. When had I become someone who never had plans? When had I accepted that my life was so empty that my absence wouldn't matter? "Maybe it's time I started having plans," I said. "Mom, you're being dramatic. Just come for Christmas." Jessica didn't mean anything by what she said. I looked again at the photos on my computer screen, at the life Cordelia had left me, at the chance she had given me to remember who I used to be before I made myself so small. Actually, Michael, I think I might be traveling for Christmas. Traveling? Where? I could hear the disbelief in his voice. Poor old Mom, traveling. The woman who hadn't been anywhere farther than the grocery store in years. I'm thinking of going out west, I said, surprised at how good the words felt to say. Napa Valley, specifically. There was a long silence. Mom, are you feeling okay? Did you hit your head or something? I laughed, and it felt like the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. No, honey. I think I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. After I hung up, I called Mr. Herrera back. I'd like to see the estate as soon as possible, I told him. Can you arrange for me to fly out next week? Of course. Cordelia would be delighted. As I started to plan my trip, the first real trip I had taken since my honeymoon 45 years ago, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed. I felt excited about my future. Michael and Jessica had no idea that their humiliating phone call had been the catalyst I needed. They thought they were putting me in my place, reminding me that I was the poor relation who should be grateful for scraps of attention. Instead, they had reminded me that I had once been brave enough to choose my own path, even when it cost me everything I had ever known. Maybe it was time to be that brave again. The plane landed in San Francisco on a crisp Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Jessica's humiliating phone call. I pressed my face against the small window, watching the city's iconic landmarks emerge from the clouds like something out of a storybook. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from a fear of flying, which I had handled better than expected, but from the sheer enormity of what I was about to discover. Mr. Herrera had arranged everything. A driver was waiting for me at the airport, holding a sign with my name, my real name, Grace Ann Parker, written in careful script. He was a middle-aged Californian man named Miguel, who spoke with a slight accent that made everything sound more elegant. "Welcome to California, Mrs. Indicator." "Parker," he said, taking my single, worn suitcase. "Mrs. Rosemont spoke of you many times. She was very much looking forward to this day." As we drove through the countryside, Miguel told me about Cordelia's last years. She had lived quietly at the estate, he said, tending her gardens and reading voraciously. She had never married, never had children, but she had maintained friendships with people all over the world through her extensive correspondence. "She received a letter from someone in your city," Miguel said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "About 2 months ago. After she read it, she called the lawyers immediately to make sure everything was in order for you." My stomach tightened. "A letter from my city?" "Yes, from a woman who knew your family. She had seen you at the local market and recognized you from old society pages. She wrote to Mrs. Rosemont about how difficult your circumstances seemed to be." I closed my eyes, shame washing over me. Someone had written to Cordelia about poor Grace Evans, the former heiress living in a tiny apartment, shopping with coupons, wearing clothes that had seen better decades. The thought of being pitied by my childhood friend made my cheeks burn. "Mrs. Rosemont wasn't pitying you," Miguel said gently, as if reading my thoughts. "She was angry, very angry. She said it was wrong that someone who had sacrificed so much for love should have to spend her golden years struggling." We turned through a set of iron gates, and my breath caught in my throat. The estate rose before us like something from a dream. 3 stories of honey-colored stone, with bougainvillea climbing the walls and tall windows reflecting the afternoon Sunday. Gardens stretched out in every direction, filled with tropical flowers and perfectly manicured hedges. Beyond the gardens, a swimming pool shimmered like scattered diamonds. "My goodness," I whispered. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Miguel smiled. Mrs. Rosemont always said it was waiting for the right person to truly appreciate it. He parked in front of the main entrance, where an older woman in a crisp gray dress was waiting on the steps. Miguel introduced her as Mrs. Hernandez, the housekeeper who had cared for the estate for the last 15 years. "Miss Parker," she said with a slight curtsy that made me feel simultaneously ridiculous and regal. "Welcome home. Home." The word resonated in my chest as she led me through the front door. The interior took my breath away. High ceilings with ornate moldings, walls covered in silk wallpaper, antique furniture that belonged in museums. Every room we passed through was more beautiful than the last. A library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a music room with a grand piano, a dining room that could seat 20 people comfortably. Mrs. Rosemont left specific instructions that nothing was to be changed, Mrs. Hernandez said, as we climbed the sweeping staircase to the second floor. She said you would know what to do with it all. She opened the door to what was clearly the master suite. The bedroom was enormous, with French doors opening onto a balcony overlooking the pool. The bed was an antique four-poster, made up with linens that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But it was the writing desk by the window that made me gasp. Sitting on the polished wood surface was a framed photograph I hadn't seen in 45 years. Cordelia and me at finishing school, our arms around each other's shoulders, laughing at something long forgotten. Next to it was a sealed envelope with my name on it. "She left this for you," Mrs. Hernandez said softly. "I'll leave you to read it in private." After she left, I sat at the desk with trembling hands and opened Cordelia's final letter to me. "My dearest Grace Ann," it began, in her familiar script, though shakier now with age. "If you are reading this, then you have finally come home to yourself." I had to stop reading to wipe my eyes. I never forgot the girl who chose love over money, who walked away from everything she had ever known because her heart told her to. You were the bravest of all of us, even if life didn't always reward that bravery as it should have. I followed your story through the years. Yes, I had someone keeping tabs on you. Don't look so surprised. I knew about your happy marriage, your son, your husband's death. I knew when you had to sell your house, when you moved into that tiny apartment. I knew about your daughter-in-law's treatment of you, and it broke my heart. You gave up a fortune for love, and you raised a son who doesn't seem to understand the value of either. But that is his failing, not yours. This estate has been waiting for you, Grace Ann. I've kept it perfect, because I always hoped that one day you would need a place where you could remember who you truly are. Not Grace the obligation, not Grace the disappointment, but Grace Ann, the woman who was brave enough to choose her own path. The trust will provide you with an income of $50,000 a month for the rest of your life, Mrs. Hernandez knows everything about running the house, and she will teach you all you need to know. Miguel will drive you wherever you need to go. All you have to do is live, truly live for the first time in decades. You are 64, my dear friend. You have at least 20 good years ahead of you. Don't waste them being small to make other people feel comfortable. Be magnificent instead. All my love, Cordelia. P.S. I left you my camera collection. Remember how you loved photography in school? Perhaps it's time to take it up again. I sat at that beautiful desk as the sun set over the pool, crying harder than I had cried since Thomas died. But these were not tears of grief or self-pity. They were tears of recognition, of coming home to myself after decades of being lost. Mrs. Hernandez knocked softly and came in with a tea service on a silver tray. "There is soup warming in the kitchen," she said, "and Miguel has brought up your luggage. Shall I unpack for you?" "Yes, please," I said. Then I laughed at how natural the words felt. When was the last time someone had offered to help me with anything? That first night, I lay in the enormous bed with its view of the pool, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house that was truly quiet. No traffic, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no sirens in the distance, just peace. I thought of Michael and Jessica, probably arguing about my strange behavior, wondering what had gotten into sensible old Mom. They had no idea that their cruelty had been the key that unlocked a door I had closed 45 years ago. For the first time since Thomas's death, I fell asleep excited for what tomorrow might bring. The next morning, Mrs. Hernandez showed me the rest of the house. The wine cellar, the conservatory filled with exotic plants, the art studio on the third floor with its north-facing windows. In the studio, I found Cordelia's camera collection, dozens of vintage and modern cameras arranged in glass cases like precious jewels. "Mrs. Rosemont said you were quite the talent with a camera when you were a girl," Mrs. Hernandez said. "She hoped you would take it up again." I picked up a sleek digital camera, surprised at how familiar it felt in my hands, despite the decades since I had held one. Through the studio windows, the Napa vineyards stretched out endlessly, begging to be captured. "Mrs. Hernandez," I said, "could Miguel take me into town today? I believe I need to buy some proper clothes." She smiled. "Of course, ma'am. though perhaps you should see the wardrobe Mrs. Rosemont left for you first. In the walk-in closet adjoining the master bedroom, I found a complete wardrobe in my size. Elegant dresses, tailored trousers, cashmere sweaters, even jewelry and scarves. It was all classic, expensive, and timeless. How did she know my size? I asked, running my hand over a beautiful wool coat. She had your measurements from the woman who wrote to her, Mrs. Hernandez said pragmatically. She wanted you to have everything you needed to step into your new life immediately. As I changed out of my discount store clothes and into a perfectly fitting cashmere sweater and wool trousers, I saw myself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was still recognizably me, but she stood taller, her shoulders back, her chin up. She looked like someone who belonged in a place like this. For the first time in decades, I looked like Grace Ann Parker again. That afternoon, Miguel drove me around the nearby town, where I opened a local bank account and learned about my new financial reality. $50,000 a month was more money than I had seen in years. The banker, a distinguished gentleman who had known Cordelia well, assured me the trust was ironclad and would continue for the rest of my life. Mrs. Rosemont was very specific, he said. You are to want for nothing, ever again. As we drove back to the estate, I asked Miguel to stop at a small cafe overlooking the vineyards. I ordered coffee and cake, real cake, not the store-bought cookies I had been subsisting on, and took out one of Cordelia's cameras. The afternoon light was perfect, bathing everything in a golden glow. I started taking pictures of the vineyards, the rolling hills, the colonial-style buildings, the birds gliding through the air. With every click of the shutter, I felt more like myself, more alive than I had been in years. When I reviewed the photos later that night, I was surprised at how good they were. My eye for composition hadn't been lost, just dormant. That night, I sat at the desk and composed my first social media post in years. I had rarely used Facebook, but I still had an account Michael had helped me set up years ago. I selected the most beautiful photo from the day the vineyards at sunset, with the hills silhouetted against the still water, and posted it with a simple caption, "New adventures begin with a single step." I didn't mention where I was or how I had gotten there. I didn't explain anything. I just shared a moment of beauty with the world. Within an hour, the post had received more likes and comments than anything I had ever shared before. Old friends from high school, distant relatives, even some of Michael's friends were commenting on the stunning photograph and asking where I had taken it. I smiled and closed the laptop without answering any of them. Let them wonder. For the first time in my life, I was under no obligation to explain myself to anyone. As I got ready for bed in my beautiful room, I caught my reflection in the mirror again. The woman looking back at me was transformed, not just by the expensive clothes or the elegant surroundings, but by something deeper. She looked like someone who knew her own worth. Tomorrow, I would explore more of this new world Cordelia had given me. I would take more pictures, learn more about my new life, maybe even start planning some changes to make the estate truly my own. But tonight, I was simply grateful. Grateful for a friend who had never forgotten me, grateful for a second chance I had never expected, and grateful for the courage to take it. It had been 3 weeks since I arrived at the estate, and I was settling into a version of myself I hadn't been in 45 years. Every morning, I woke up in the 4-poster bed with the vineyards glowing outside my windows, and for a few moments, I couldn't believe this was my life. Mrs. Hernandez had become more than a housekeeper. She was my guide into a world I had almost forgotten existed. She taught me the routines of the estate, introduced me to the local merchants who had served Cordelia for years, and gently reminded me that I no longer needed to check price tags or count pennies. "Ma'am," she said one morning as I hesitated over an expensive bottle of wine at the town market, "you must remember, this is your life now. Mrs. Rosemont wanted you to enjoy every day, not spend it worrying about money. It was harder to adjust to than I had expected. 45 years of careful budgeting, of choosing the generic brand, of making do with less. Those habits didn't just disappear overnight. But gradually, I began to understand what Cordelia had meant by living magnificently. I started with small things, fresh flowers in every room, changed twice a week, the expensive face cream I had always admired but never bought, real silk scarves instead of polyester imitations, Each purchase felt like a small act of rebellion against the careful, restricted life I had been living. The photography was coming back to me with surprising speed. Miguel had driven me to different locations every day. Colonial towns nestled in mountain valleys, pristine vineyards that reflected jungle-covered peaks, wineries cascading down hillsides in perfect rows. I was building a portfolio of images that captured not just the beauty of Napa Valley, but the joy of rediscovering my own eye for beauty. One afternoon, as I reviewed the day's photos on my laptop, I selected the most striking one, a close-up of grapevines, dew-covered with the Mayacamas Mountains in the background, and posted it to Facebook. As had become my habit, I added no explanation, no location tag, just the image itself. Within minutes, the comments began to roll in. "Grace, this is absolutely breathtaking. Where did you take this? Are you traveling? When did you become such an amazing photographer? This looks like Napa. How can you afford to travel there?" That last comment stung, even though I knew it came from curiosity more than malice. How could poor Grace Evans afford Napa, the woman who shopped with coupons and wore the same coat for 5 winters? I closed the laptop without replying, but the comment lingered in my mind. It reminded me that back home, I was still seen as the struggling widow, the woman who lived in a tiny apartment and counted every dollar. They had no idea that Grace Ann Parker had awoken from her long slumber. That evening, Mrs. Hernandez knocked on my door as I was getting ready for bed. "Ma'am," she said, "Miguel mentioned you seemed troubled today. Is everything all right?" I had grown fond of Mrs. Hernandez over the past few weeks. She was probably 10 years younger than me, but she had a maternal way about her that made me feel cared for in a way I hadn't experienced since Thomas died. "I was just thinking about home," I said, "about how people there see me." She nodded thoughtfully. Mrs. Rosemont struggled with that as well when she first inherited money from her family. She said it was difficult to step into a bigger life when everyone around you expected you to stay small. What did she do? She decided that other people's expectations were not her responsibility. She said that trying to make yourself small, to make others feel comfortable, was a form of self-betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Cordelia's words, filtered through Mrs. Hernandez's gentle wisdom. Self-betrayal. Was that what I had been doing for years? Making myself smaller and smaller to avoid making others uncomfortable? The next morning, I made a decision. I called a local photographer I'd been recommended, a young woman named Carmen who specialized in portrait photography. "I'd like to have some professional photographs taken," I told her. "Not for any special occasion. Just because." She arrived the next afternoon with her equipment and a contagious enthusiasm for her work. She was perhaps 35, with an artistic eye and a gentle way of putting her subjects at ease. "You have wonderful bone structure," she said, as she arranged the lighting in the estate's library, "and your eyes tell so many stories." We spent 2 hours taking photographs. Some were formal portraits in my new, elegant clothes. Others were more casual, me reading in the library, tending to the garden, standing on the balcony with the vineyards behind me. With every shot, I felt more like myself, more like the woman I was meant to be. When Carmen showed me the results a few days later, I gasped. The woman in these photographs was radiant, confident, alive. Her silver hair was beautifully styled. Her skin glowed with health and happiness, and her eyes sparkled with intelligence and humor. "Is this really me?" I asked, looking at a particularly striking portrait where I was laughing at something Carmen had said. "This is you as you truly are," she said simply. "Many people spend their lives hiding from the camera because they don't like what they see. But you came alive in front of the lens." That afternoon, I selected my favorite photograph, the one of me laughing, wearing a beautiful cream-colored cashmere sweater that brought out the warmth in my eyes. I looked happy, sophisticated, and completely at ease in my surroundings. I posted it to Facebook with a simple caption, "Embracing this beautiful season of life." The response was immediate and overwhelming. "Grace, you look absolutely stunning. I barely recognize you. You look 20 years younger. Where are you? You look like you're living in a palace. Is this really you? You look like a completely different person." For the first time since I had arrived in Napa, I replied to some of the comments. "Thank you for the kind words. I'm discovering that life can be beautiful at any age when you choose to embrace it fully. But it was the private messages that truly revealed how my transformation was being received. Several were from old friends expressing genuine happiness for me, but others carried an undercurrent of confusion, even resentment. Grace, I'm so confused. Last month you were living in that tiny apartment, and now you look like you're living like a millionaire. What is going on? Must be nice to suddenly have money to spend on yourself. Some of us are still struggling. I hope you haven't gotten involved in some online scam. These sudden lifestyle changes are usually too good to be true. I looked at these messages, feeling a familiar urge to explain, to apologize, to make myself smaller so that others wouldn't feel uncomfortable with my good fortune. But then I remembered Mrs. Hernandez's words about self-betrayal. Instead of replying to the critical messages, I closed my laptop and walked out onto the balcony. The sun was setting over the vineyards, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that took my breath away. In the distance, the church bells were chiming the evening hour, a sound that had become as comforting as a lullaby. This was my life now. Not because I had won the lottery or married a rich man or done anything morally questionable. This was my life because a dear friend had remembered who I used to be and had given me the chance to become her again. I owed no one an explanation. I owed no one an apology for my good fortune. And I certainly owed no one the right to make me feel guilty for finally living well. Over the next few days, I began to post more frequently. Pictures of my morning coffee on the terrace, the fresh flowers Mrs. Hernandez arranged each day, the books I was reading in the library, the meals Miguel and I shared at charming local restaurants. I didn't caption them with explanations or justifications. I simply shared moments of beauty and joy. The comments continued to pour in, some genuinely happy for me, others increasingly bitter and suspicious. I started to see patterns in who responded with joy and who responded with resentment. The friends who were secure in their own lives celebrated my happiness. Those who were struggling or unhappy seemed to take my transformation as a personal affront. One evening, as I was scrolling through the day's comments, my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach tightened. I had been dreading this call, knowing it would come eventually. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying that tone of forced patience I knew so well. "We need to talk." "Hello, Michael. How are you?" "I'm confused, Mom. Really confused. Jessica has been showing me your Facebook posts, and we can't figure out what's going on." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "What do you mean?" "I mean, where are you getting the money for all of this? The clothes, the travel, the fancy restaurants. Last month you were living in that tiny apartment, shopping with coupons, and now you're posting pictures that look like you're living in some luxury resort." "I am living comfortably," I said carefully. "Mom, comfortably doesn't cover it. You look like you won the lottery. And that apartment, is that where you're staying? It looks like it costs more per night than most people make in a month." I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Whatever she was saying, it was clearly agitating Michael further. "Mom, Jessica thinks you might be getting scammed. You know, those online romance things where they take advantage of older people. Have you been talking to someone online? Someone who's convinced you to spend money you don't have?" The implication hit me like a slap. In their minds, the only way poor, naive Grace could suddenly be living well was if she were being duped by criminals. "Michael," I said, my voice colder than I had ever heard it, "I am not being scammed, I am not delusional, and I am not your concern." "Of course you're my concern. You're my mother. We're worried about you. You weren't worried about me when you let your wife tell me I could wash dishes for Christmas. You weren't worried when I was living alone in that apartment, struggling to make ends meet. Your concern seems to be very selective." There was a long silence. In the background, I could hear Jessica saying something urgently, but Michael shushed her. "Mom, that's not fair. We've always been worried about you." "Really?" I asked quietly, because worry usually involves actually asking someone how they are, not just assuming they're being foolish when their circumstances improve. "So how are your circumstances improving? You can at least tell me that." I looked around my beautiful bedroom, at the life Cordelia had given me, at the photographs I had taken that were spread across the desk. I thought about the trust fund that would support me for the rest of my life. The friends I was making in town, the woman I was rediscovering in the mirror each morning. I can tell you that I am happier than I have been in years, I said. I can tell you that I am finally living the life I was meant to live. And I can tell you that I am not asking you for anything, not your approval, not your understanding, and certainly not your permission. Mom, you're scaring us. Am I? Good, I said, surprised at how much I meant it. Maybe it's time you were a little scared of losing me, instead of assuming I'll always be there to accept whatever scraps of attention you decide to throw my way. I hung up before he could reply, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. I had just burned a bridge I had spent decades trying to cross. But as I looked out at the vineyard shining silver in the moonlight, I realized I didn't want to cross that bridge anymore. I wanted to build something new, something better, something worthy of the woman I was becoming. The next morning, Mrs. Hernandez brought my coffee with a knowing smile. "You seem lighter today, ma'am," she said, "as if a weight has been lifted." "I believe it has," I said, raising my cup in a small toast to the new day. "I believe it finally has." The morning after my conversation with Michael, I woke up to find 71 missed calls on my phone. 71. I stared at the screen in disbelief as I counted them. 52 from Michael, 3 from numbers I didn't recognize, and 2 from what appeared to be Jessica's cell phone, though she had never called me directly before. My voicemail was full. As I listened to the messages over my morning coffee, served by Mrs. Hernandez on the finest china, I felt like I was watching a slow-motion car crash unfold. Michael's first message was apologetic. "Mom, I'm sorry for how that call ended. Please call me back. Jessica and I are just worried about you." By the 5th message, his tone had shifted to frustration. "Mom, this silent treatment isn't helping anyone. We need to know what's going on. This isn't like you." The later messages grew increasingly desperate. "Mom, please, I've been calling all night. I'm starting to think something is really wrong. Just call me so I know you're okay." But it was Jessica's messages that truly revealed the depth of their panic. Grace. Her voice was tight, with barely controlled hysteria. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it needs to stop. Michael hasn't slept all night. You can't just disappear and post these ridiculous pictures without explaining yourself." Her second message was even more revealing. "Look, I know we haven't always gotten along, but Michael loves you. He's talking about flying to Napa to find you. Do you have any idea how much that would cost? Just call us back and explain what is happening." I put the phone down and walked to the French doors that opened onto my balcony. The morning fog was lifting off the vineyards, revealing the Mayacamas Mountains in all their jungle-covered glory. Somewhere across the country, my son and his wife were losing sleep over my silence, but for the first time in years, I had slept peacefully through the night. Mrs. Hernandez appeared with fresh pastries from the town bakery. "Difficult news from home?" she asked gently, noticing my expression. "My son is worried about my well-being," I said carefully. She nodded wisely. "Adult children often struggle when their parents begin to live independently. They prefer you to need them, even if they don't particularly want to help." Her words hit me like a physical blow because they were so accurate. Michael did prefer me to need him. It made him feel like a good son, without requiring much actual effort on his part. My independence threatened the comfortable dynamic where he could feel virtuous with minimal investment. I decided not to return the calls immediately. Instead, I spent the morning in town with Miguel, visiting the farmer's market and selecting fresh ingredients for a cooking lesson with the estate's part-time chef, Aurelio. I was learning to make proper French pastries, something I had always wanted to try but had never had the time or the resources. As Aurelio taught me to fold butter into dough for croissants, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. My hands worked the delicate dough, while my mind focused on the technique, the precision, the art of creating something beautiful from simple ingredients. "Magnifique," Aurelio exclaimed as my croissants came out of the oven, golden brown and perfectly flaky. "You have a natural talent, ma'am." I photographed the croissants on the marble countertop, with the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows. The image was simple but elegant. The golden pastries, a cup of coffee in fine china, and in the background, a glimpse of the vineyards through the window. I posted the photo with a caption, Learning new skills at any age brings such joy. Today's accomplishment: homemade croissants. The response was immediate and intense. Within an hour, the post had dozens of comments, but these were different from the previous ones. There was an edge of desperation to many of them. Grace, your son has been posting everywhere looking for you. Please, call him. Are you okay? Michael says you're not answering your phone. This is getting ridiculous. Just tell people where you are and how you're affording this lifestyle. But it was the direct messages that truly revealed the firestorm I had unleashed. From a neighbor: Grace, I ran into Michael at the grocery store, and he is beside himself. He thinks you might be having some kind of mental breakdown. He showed me your pictures, and honestly, I'm confused too. How did you go from struggling to pay rent to living like this? From an old coworker: I don't mean to pry, but some of us are wondering if you might be in some kind of trouble. The sudden lifestyle change, the mysterious location, not answering your family's calls, it all seems very suspicious. From Michael's friend's wife: I hope you know what you're doing. Michael is devastated. Jessica says he's been up for 2 straight days, trying to figure out where you are. Is it really worth destroying your relationship with your only son? That last message made me put the phone down with trembling hands. Destroying my relationship with my only son, as if I were the one who had spent years allowing that relationship to deteriorate through neglect and disrespect. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code from home. Hello? I answered cautiously. Mrs. Evans? This is Officer Martinez with the local police department. Your son filed a wellness check request. He's concerned you may be missing or in danger. My heart stopped. I'm not missing, officer. I'm traveling. I understand that, ma'am. But your son says you are not responding to his calls, and your recent social media activity suggests you may be in a vulnerable state. He's concerned someone might be taking advantage of you. The humiliation burned in my chest. My own son had called the police because I was living too well for his comfort. Officer Martinez, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I am a 64-year-old woman in full command of my mental faculties. I am traveling of my own free will. I am not in danger, and I am not being taken advantage of. My son's concerns, while perhaps well-intentioned, are unfounded. Ma'am, would you be willing to call him just to put his mind at ease? I looked around my beautiful kitchen, at the croissants I had made with my own hands, at the life I had built in just a few weeks. Then I thought of Michael, sitting in his perfect house with his perfect wife, so disturbed by my happiness that he had called the police. I'll consider it, I said. Thank you for checking. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Mrs. Hernandez found me there an hour later, staring out at the vineyards. Bad news? She asked. My son called the police because I haven't returned his calls. She raised an eyebrow. Ah, the adult child's panic response. Mrs. Rosemont experienced something similar when she first inherited her money. Her nephew tried to have her declared incompetent because she started traveling and buying art. What did she do? She invited him to visit. She allowed him to see for himself that she was quite capable of managing her own affairs. Sometimes the only way to stop the speculation is to show them the reality. That night, I finally called Michael back. He answered on the first ring. Mom, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay? We've been going out of our minds. I'm fine, Michael. I'm in Napa. Napa? How did you get to Napa? Mom, the police called today. I had to file a wellness check because you weren't answering your phone. I closed my eyes, trying to find a patience I wasn't sure I possessed. You called the police because I didn't answer my phone for a day? It wasn't just a day, and it's not just the phone calls. Mom, your Facebook posts. You're posting pictures of places that cost thousands of dollars a night. Where are you getting this money? I inherited it. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. You inherited it? He finally said. From who? You don't have any family left. From an old friend. Someone I knew before I married your father. What old friend? You never mentioned any rich friends. I could hear Jessica in the background, her voice sharp and demanding, though I couldn't make out the words. Michael, I don't owe you a detailed explanation of my finances. Mom, this is crazy. Last month you were worried about paying your power bill, and now you're telling me you inherited enough money to live like a millionaire. Do you understand how that sounds? It sounds like my circumstances have improved. It sounds like you're being scammed." His voice rose, desperation seeping in. "Mom, these online criminals are sophisticated. They can make fake websites, fake bank accounts, fake everything. They target lonely older women and convince them they've inherited money or won contests. Stop." My voice was ice cold. "Just stop. Mom, I'm trying to help you." "No, Michael. You are trying to convince me that I am too stupid to manage my own life. You are so uncomfortable with the idea that I could be happy, that I could be living well, that you would rather believe I am being victimized by criminals. That's not it, Mom. We just want to make sure you're safe. You want to make sure I'm still the same pitiful woman who accepts being treated like the hired help at family gatherings? You want me to go back to my tiny apartment, and my careful budget, and my grateful acceptance of whatever scraps of attention you decide to throw my way? Mom, please. I'm going to send you the address of where I am staying," I said, my decision made. "You can verify that it is real, that I am safe, that I am exactly where I say I am. But Michael, if you ever call the police again, if you ever question my mental competence again, I will cut you out of my life completely." I hung up and immediately sent him the address of the estate, along with Mrs. Hernandez's phone number as a contact person. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I changed my Facebook privacy settings so that only confirmed friends could see my posts. And I blocked several of the people who had been leaving the most intrusive comments. My phone started ringing immediately, Michael calling back, probably in shock at my ultimatum. I turned it off. Mrs. Hernandez appeared with a glass of wine and a gentle smile. "The first time you set a boundary," she said, "it feels like you are being cruel. But boundaries are not cruel, they are necessary." That night, I slept better than I had since I arrived in Napa. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself completely, without apologizing or explaining or trying to make everyone else comfortable with my choices. The next morning brought a new flood of messages, but these felt different. Michael had clearly shared the estate's address with others, because several messages referenced looking it up online. Okay, I Googled the address, and it's definitely real. It's some kind of historic estate. How did you end up there? I looked up the property records. That place is worth millions. I'm so confused about what is happening. But the most revealing message came from Jessica herself. "I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but Michael deserves better than a mother who disappears and then threatens to cut him off. You are being selfish and cruel." I looked at that message for a long time. Selfish and cruel, for living well, for being happy, for refusing to accept mistreatment. I took a screenshot of the message and saved it. Not because I intended to do anything with it, but because I wanted to remember this moment. The moment when my son's wife revealed exactly what she thought of me, and exactly how threatened she was by my transformation. As I sipped my morning coffee on the balcony, watching the birds glide over the vineyards, I realized that something profound had shifted. I was no longer afraid of their disapproval. I was no longer desperate for their acceptance. For the first time in my adult life, I was free. But freedom, I was about to learn, came with a price. And Michael and Jessica were not finished trying to drag me back into the small, manageable life they preferred me to live. It had been 2 months since I'd last spoken with Michael, and the silence had become a gift I didn't know I needed. Christmas was approaching. My first Christmas in Napa. My first Christmas in decades without the weight of obligation pressing down on my shoulders. Mrs. Hernandez had decorated the estate beautifully with garlands of fresh bougainvillea and white lights that reflected in the swimming pool like fallen stars. The grand fireplace in the main living room crackled with warmth, and the scent of cinnamon and cloves from the holiday cookies I was baking filled the air. "Will you miss your traditional celebrations?" she asked me one snowy evening as we sat by the fire, she with her knitting and I with a book on California history. "I thought I would," I said honestly, "but I don't. For years, Christmas meant walking on eggshells, trying not to say the wrong thing, being grateful for the privilege of washing dishes after dinner. This feels like the first real Christmas I've had in decades." She smiled wisely. "Mrs. Rosemont used to say that the holidays revealed the truth about relationships. The people who truly love you want you to be happy. The others want you to be useful. That wisdom proved prophetic when my phone rang on December 23rd. Michael's name flashed on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Hello, Michael." "Mom." His voice was different, smaller somehow, less certain. "How are you?" "I'm well. How are you?" We're fine." "Listen, Mom. I wanted to call before Christmas. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I want to apologize." I put my book down, surprised. Apologize for what, specifically? For calling the police? For assuming you were being scammed? For not trusting you to know your own mind? He paused, and I could hear him struggling with the words. "Jessica and I drove past your old apartment last week, and seeing it empty really hit me. You're really gone." "Yes, I am. I looked up that estate online. It's incredible, Mom. I had no idea you had connections to that kind of wealth. There's a lot you don't know about me, Michael. A lot I never told you." "Why didn't you? About your family? About your past?" I stood and walked to the window, watching the snow fall silently on the manicured gardens. "How do you explain to your grown son that you had hidden your past to protect him from feeling guilty for choices made before he was born? Because I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I had given up. And because I was afraid you would think less of your father if you knew what I had left behind to marry him. I could never think less of Dad. I know that now. But I was very young when I made those choices, and I thought I was protecting you both." There was a long silence. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you, God, I don't even know where to start. The way we treated you, the way I let Jessica talk to you, the way I just assumed you would always be there no matter how little effort I put in. It was wrong. All of it was wrong." Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of a burden finally being acknowledged. "What made you change your mind?" I asked quietly. "Honestly? Seeing how you've been living without us? The pictures you post, the confidence in your voice. You're happier without us, aren't you?" I could have lied. I could have rushed to reassure him, to minimize my happiness so he wouldn't feel bad. But that would have been the old Grace, the one who made herself small to comfort others. "Yes," I said simply, "I am happier." He let out a shaky breath. That's what I was afraid to hear, and what I deserved to hear. "Michael, I don't want you to feel guilty for my happiness, but I need you to understand that I am not going back to the way things were. This isn't a phase or a rebellion. This is who I am now. I know, and I want to get to know this person, if you'll let me. The real you, not the version of you we forced you to be." "What does Jessica think about this conversation?" Another long pause. "Jessica and I have been having some difficult discussions. She's not handling your transformation well. She liked having someone she could look down on, and now that's gone." I was taken aback by his honesty. "And how do you feel about that?" "I feel like I'm seeing my wife clearly for the first time in our marriage, and I don't like everything I see. I'm sorry, Michael. That must be difficult. Don't apologize. You didn't cause this. You just stopped enabling it. Jessica's behavior toward you was always wrong. I just never wanted to see it, because it was easier to let her be mean to you than to deal with the conflict of confronting her." The admission hung between us, raw and honest. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. "That depends on what you want, and what you're willing to change." "I want my mother back. The real one, not the diminished version we created. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn that, even if it means setting boundaries with my wife. Especially if it means that." That evening, I called Miguel into the living room. "Miguel, I'd like to extend an invitation to my son to visit in the new year. Just him. Can you arrange for the guest room and help with the travel logistics?" Miguel smiled. "Of course, ma'am. It will be good to have family here who appreciates what you have built." Over the next few days, Michael and I spoke several more times. He was genuinely interested in my new life, asking about the estate, the town, my photography. For the first time in years, we had real conversations. Not the stilted exchanges of obligation, but genuine communication between two adults who cared about each other. He told me about his job, his struggles with Jessica's increasing demands for status and control, his regret over the years he had wasted trying to please a wife who was never satisfied. I told him about Cordelia, about the choice I had made at 19 to marry for love instead of money, about the friend who had remembered me after all these years and given me a second chance at life. "I'm proud of you," he said during one of our calls. "I know that probably sounds strange coming from your son, but I'm proud of who you've become, and I'm ashamed that it took losing you to see it." Christmas Day was peaceful and perfect. Mrs. Hernandez and Miguel joined me for dinner, and we exchanged small gifts and shared stories of Christmases past. I felt no sadness at missing the family gathering I had been excluded from for so many years. Instead, I felt grateful for my new life, for the friends who had become family, and for the son who was finally ready to meet his mother as she truly was. Michael arrived in Napa on January 15th, looking nervous and uncertain as Miguel drove him up the winding path to the estate. I watched from the window as he got out of the car and just stood for a moment, taking in the bougainvillea-covered stone walls and the elegant windows. When Mrs. Hernandez led him into the living room where I was waiting, his eyes were wide with wonder. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke slightly. "This is incredible." I stood to hug him, and for the first time in years, the hug felt genuine on both sides. "Welcome to my home," I said, and I meant it completely. Over the next week, I showed Michael everything: the town, the gardens, the views from every window. I introduced him to Aurelio, who taught him to make the same croissants he had taught me. We took long walks by the pool, and I photographed him laughing as he tried to feed the swans. But most importantly, we talked, really talked, about his childhood, about the mistakes we had both made, about the future we wanted to build together. "I've been thinking about separating from Jessica," he told me one night as we sat by the fire. "Not because of you, but because I'm finally seeing who she really is and who I become when I'm with her." "That's a decision only you can make," I said carefully. "But I can tell you that life is too short to spend it with people who make you smaller." "Is that what we did to you? Made you smaller?" "Yes, but I let you. I chose to shrink instead of fighting for space. That was my mistake. And now, I looked around my beautiful home, at the life I had built from the ashes of the old one, at the son who was finally ready to see me as I truly was. Now I take up all the space I need," I said, "and I don't apologize for it." On his last night, Michael and I sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the lights of the town reflect in the dark water of the pool. "I know this might sound selfish," he said, "but I hope you'll come visit sometimes. Not back to the old life, but just to visit. I want to show people who my mother really island." "I'll think about it," I said. "But Michael, you need to understand. This is my home now. This is where I belong." "I know. And I'm happy for you. Really happy." As Miguel drove him to the airport the next morning, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. I had reclaimed my relationship with my son, but on my own terms, I had set boundaries, and I had held them. I had refused to shrink back into the shape they had preferred me to keep. 3 months later, Michael called to tell me that he and Jessica were getting a divorce. She had been furious about my bad influence and had demanded that he choose between his mother and his wife. "I chose you," he said simply. "Actually, I chose myself. But choosing myself meant choosing you, too." That afternoon, I posted a new photograph on Facebook, a sunset over the vineyards, with the ruins silhouetted against the golden sky. The caption read simply, "Every ending is a new beginning." The comments were warm and supportive now, mostly from people who had come to understand that my transformation was real and permanent. The bitter voices had gradually faded away, blocked or simply choosing to disengage when they realized I was not going back to being the person they could pity or control. But it was Michael's comment that made me smile the most. "So proud of my amazing mother. Can't wait to visit again soon." As I closed my laptop and prepared for another peaceful evening in my beautiful home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. A cruel phone call from my daughter-in-law, meant to put me in my place, had instead awakened something in me I thought was lost forever. I was Grace Ann Parker again, not the frightened 19-year-old who had given up everything for love, but the woman she had grown into, confident, independent, unashamed to take up space in the world. Cordelia had been right. I had 20 good years ahead of me when she left me this gift, and I intended to live every one of them magnificently. Outside my windows, the vineyards stretched endlessly toward the horizon, reflecting the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere across the country, there was a Christmas table where my absence had once been mandated, where I had been told I could wash the dishes if I wanted to participate. But here, in my beautiful home by the vineyards, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was instead of what I could provide, every day was a celebration. I was finally, completely, free. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you been through something similar? Comment below. And in the meantime, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thanks for watching this far.